I think everybody can agree that this past Sunday, Slammiversary 2014, was an incredibly important show for TNA as a brand. The bottom line is, no matter how much you try to spin it, this company needed some positive feelings, some positive buzz about them and their product and their ability to put on a quality marquee show. And from my perspective, this was a very important show because after a little over a month of not watching Impact, because to me it had gotten to that point where it was that bad, where there are no longer any redeeming qualities to watch, this was my kind of last chance for TNA to draw me in and get me back to watching Impact on a weekly basis. The question is, though, did TNA get the job done? And did TNA do what they needed to do? And will I ultimately go back to watching Impact? Well, let's find out. One thing that had to be good to see from TNA's perspective, and frankly from anybody's perspective that was actually watching this pay-per-view on Sunday, was the fact that there was actually a decent crowd there for this pay-per-view. This was not a Bound for Glory crowd. This was not, a lockdown crowd. I think it was somewhere around 2,500 people came to this event, and that's got to be encouraging for TNA. Not performing one of your major shows in front of 900 or 1,000 people. Here's 2,500 people, and the crowd was really good. They were lively, they were into it, and it definitely helped with the overall feeling of the show. And again, if anything, shows for a TNA that, hey, maybe we can put some asses in the seats once in a while. One thing Slammiversary 2014 needed to do for TNA, besides some of the stuff I talked about at the beginning, was show the type of in-ring product that TNA can produce and the type of in-ring performers that TNA has at its disposal as a part of its roster. They needed to emphasize that, and to me, they needed to maximize that. And one way to not accomplish that and not do that is by having multiple promo segments during one of your biggest pay-per-views of the year. Look, if you're expecting people to buy pay-per-views, I don't think they're buying pay-per-views to see a lengthy MVP promo, a lengthy Dixie Carter vignette or promo, whatever you want to call it, interview, what have you. They're not paying to see an incredibly long Hall of Fame announcement promo segment. The people, I don't think, are paying to see that type of stuff, and that's not the type of stuff that TNA should have been emphasizing here. You want to make this feel like a 3-hour wrestling extravaganza, not a 3-hour Impact. So with that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the matches and begin with the match that I was assuming was going to open the show, the X Division 6-way ladder match for the title. And my thing was, I talked about it in my Slammiversary preview, was that if this was going to open the show, this needed to set the tone. This needed to be 20 minutes of guys flipping and bumping and high-spotting the fuck out of everything. This needed to be spectacular. This needed to be the match that really set the tone for the rest of the night. Now, some people are going to sit there and say that it did just because it had a few flips and a few kicks and it was an X Division match, and that automatically is going to get it a pass. This, to me, was a match that just as it was starting to get good and just as it was starting to go where it really needed to go, it came to a screeching halt, and it had a disappointing, unsatisfying, unfulfilling finish, which is so often the case to me with TNA matches, and this here was no different, where I felt this match really, really needed to set a great tone for the night. For me, anyways, it kind of set an tone for the night. So due to MVP's torn meniscus that he suffered on the independent scene, the Slammiversary main event had to be changed. That's never a good thing. When one of your biggest shows of the year, you have to change your main event because of an injury. Not good. But TNA, I think, did the best they could considering the circumstance and situation that they found themselves in. They took Samoa Joe versus Bobby Lashley and Austin Aries versus Kenny King and made them basically qualifying matches where the winners of each match would go on to wrestle Eric Young at the end of the show in a steel cage for the World Heavyweight Championship. And here's my thing. I look at that first match, Samoa Joe, Bobby Lashley, I'm like, this could have been really bad, or this could be pretty good. It actually ended up on the pretty good side. Now, when we get to the finish, on the one hand, I sit there and I say, why in the fuck have Samoa Joe job out? Why have Samoa Joe lose here? Why bring him back recently in dramatic fashion just to sit there and have him lose? I didn't like that on the one hand. On the other hand, though, I was okay with it, because even though I view Bobby Lashley as a WWE reject, and even though it feels like a lot of the same old crap, bury the TNA guy at the expense of somebody else that wasn't all that big of a deal in another bigger place, I will say is that Bobby Lashley is a heel presence. And they had the heel aligned with the power player figure, so to speak, win clean in this match. No cheating, no bullshit. Bobby Lashley beat Samoa Joe straight up. And in a time in professional wrestling where I feel we need more heels that can actually be badasses, I was perfectly okay when all was said and done with Bobby Lashley beating Samoa Joe, believe it or not. Then you got to the other match, and you had Austin Aries versus Kenny King. I actually thought in a way that they were going to have maybe Kenny King win this, so that way you would basically have 2-on-1. But I'm actually glad they didn't do that. You know, it's one thing to rip off WWE in the way they did with Eric Young winning the world title in the way that he did. But to me, this would have felt too much like Evolution if you would have had both Kenny King and Bobby Lashley advance to face Eric Young in that steel cage match. They went in a different direction. They had Austin Aries in there, so you had kind of like a clear-cut heel. You had the clear-cut babyface in Eric Young, and then you had a guy that could kind of go on either side of the fence, but people would tend to like in an Austin Aries. And the match between Aries and King I thought was really, really good. As far as Magnus versus Willow, I hate the Abyss character, and I don't understand the hard-on that this company has for the Abyss character after all these years. He is just dumb. He is just stupid. He is just pointless. And frankly, I think the involvement of Abyss took away quite a bit from this Magnus-Willow match, in my opinion. However, I will say this, is that Magnus was okay here. This match was okay here. And most importantly of all, Magnus primarily pretty much got a clean victory over a Jeff Hardy, a Willow, if you will. You know, with all of those bullshit victories that Magnus had as the world champion. Imagine if he would have had one or two of these type of signature victories as world champion, how much better he would have been, how much more credible he would have been, and how much more successful his title reign could have been. So I was actually pleasantly surprised. I thought with Abyss out there, and with it being Willow, Jeff Hardy, I thought that Willow was going over here. And he didn't. And it was a pleasant surprise for me for the night. I don't know if anybody actually takes the TNA Hall of Fame very seriously, but that was going to be one of the parts of this show, was Kurt Angle, last year's inductee, so to speak, was going to sit there and announce this year's inductee, or in this case, inductees. Seems like to me it's TNA's chance to try and troll the WWE. Your first inductee was Sting. Well, you can't put him in your Hall of Fame yet, so we're going to put him in ours. Kurt Angle last year. You don't have Kurt Angle. You can't put him in yours, so we're going to put him in ours. And now this year, it's Team 3D. You don't have him. You can't put him in yours, so we're going to put him in ours. I'm like, oh, Christ. Yeah, the crowd was happy, and I'm sure a lot of you thought this was cool. But I'm like, come on, man. Could we find somebody else other than the type of performer that fits into this mold of TNA basically saying to WWE, stick your head in doo-doo. We've got him, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, come on, man. And this segment fucking took forever. It's one thing to sit there and have a promo and then have the announcement. Well, it was a promo, an announcement, and an incredibly long fucking segment that I just frankly thought was too damn long for this pay-per-view and was focusing again on the wrong things instead of focusing on the in-ring action, which should have been the primary focus of the show, at least in my opinion. I wasn't surprised to see that the Von Erich boys were going to face off with the BroMans at the pay-per-view. I was assuming that's where they were going. It was very cool to see the Von Erich family represented in some way in Texas the way they were on this show, and I appreciate TNA doing that at the end of the day. And it actually, to me, provided perhaps the coolest moment of the entire pay-per-view when Kevin Von Erich latched that claw in on, I think it was DJZ. That was fucking cool. That place popped. That place still understands what the Von Erichs once meant to professional wrestling in Texas, and in particular in the Dallas area, and they let it be known, and it produced a memorable, cool moment for this show. My question is, who in the fuck decided that you were going to have these Von Erich boys come in, and you were going to do a crappy DQ finish? You're not even going to let the Von Erich boys go over clean. And don't sit there and tell me, well, if they're not with the company full-time, that doesn't make sense. TNA has no problem doing that a lot of the other fucking times, so why not do it here in freaking Texas with the Von Erichs? Have them beat the fucking BroMans. What purpose do the BroMans serve? They serve none. They are perfect fodder to be served up to the freaking Von Erich boys. You know, put him over big in Dallas area. Put him over big in Texas. And then afterwards, have fucking Kevin Von Erich come in and put on the goddamn claw. And the place really would fucking explode. It's like even when TNA, you know, gets something right, they still find a way to, in some ways, do something stupid and, dare I say, TNA it up. Knockouts title match between Gail Kim and Angelina Love. I've seen it before. I know what to expect out of it before. And I knew what to expect again. And I pretty much got what I was expecting. And that's about all I'm going to say about this. TNA, please, for the love of God, bring in some different women. Holy shit. So fresh off the heels of being announced as the newest member of the TNA Hall of Fame as part of Team 3D, you've got Bully Ray facing EC3 in this Texas death match. Now, to me, of course, this is something that should be the big culmination of a feud, not something that you spent a month setting up to, basically. With that being said, I was wondering if this was just going to be a passable Bully Ray match to where he almost needs these hardcore stipulations to have a good match, or was it going to be something better? And again, I guess it depends on your perspective. If you like physicality and you like brutalness in your matches, you like this match. If you hate the ridiculous overbooking of TNA matches and the ridiculous finishes and the way they are pulled off and executed, then you hated this fucking match. And I hated this fucking match. Here is a chance for an EC3 to go over clean. Here is a chance, so to speak. Here is a chance for EC3 to really be established as a future player. Here is a chance for EC3 to get a big-time signature victory. And all they ended up doing was involving Rockstar Spud, grinding the match to a screeching halt once Dixie Carter gets fucking involved. And of all things, freaking Bully Ray, of all people, Bully Ray, a guy who's done flaming tables matches and all types of hardcore matches throughout his 20-year fucking wrestling career, gets hit in the head with the kendo stick, one fucking time, falls through a table, and gets counted out to 10. And that's how EC3 wins the fucking match. It's like Dixie Carter can't help herself. She's a mark for seeing herself on TV. She's a mark for being a part of the wrestling business on the screen. And you see the type of results that it produces. And it produces a victory for EC3 that just didn't really do anything for him. Typical TNA. Give it to TNA to do stupid shit with C or D-list level stars or athletes, so to speak, and try to sell it like it's the biggest thing of all time. James Storm, Mr. Anderson. They kept emphasizing throughout the night that George Selvey and a few other Dallas Cowboys were there in attendance. Whoopee! Oh, boy. Oh, boy. This, to me, is one of these shining examples of the stupidity of TNA. Now, let me get this straight. We're pointing out minor Dallas Cowboys players to emphasize that we're in Dallas, that, oh, we're a big deal. We're going to mention 4 or 5 Cowboys that most of you that are watching this have probably never fucking heard of. Then we're going to sit there and have this match between James Storm and Mr. Anderson. And of all things, Mr. Anderson from Green Bay, Wisconsin, is going to get help from the Dallas Cowboys, and then after he wins this match, in part because of the help of the Dallas Cowboys, he will sit there and glad hand and celebrate with the Dallas fucking Cowboys. This is stupid. No, don't excuse it. This makes absolutely no fucking sense. Why would any Green Bay Packer fan of all people in their right fucking mind be sitting there glad-handing and celebrating with anything or anything completely related or in any way indirectly related with the Dallas fucking Cowboys? That would be like Mr. Anderson celebrating with Chicago Bears. That would be like somebody that's a Bears fan celebrating with fucking Packers players or Vikings players. It's fucking stupid. And I can't believe Mr. Anderson signed off on this shit. The original main event for this pay-per-view was supposed to be MVP and Eric Young for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship in a steel cage match. Well, didn't happen. MVP goes and hurts his knee, I think tear his meniscus, and TNA has to call an audible. So I'm not going to begrudge them too much for having to call an audible, and I think they did the best that they could considering the circumstances and the relatively short notice that they had. And Bobby Lashley, Austin Aries, Eric Young. Okay for a major pay-per-view main event. I would hope for more, but okay. My whole philosophy going for this match is that Anybody but Eric Young needed to walk out with this fucking title, because with all the other stupid shit that TNA was doing, it was ultimately Eric Young winning the world title in the way that he did in the follow-up afterwards that made me sit there finally and say once and for all, nope, that's enough. That's enough. I can't take this shit anymore. And you would think for a company that has been so solely focused on their television ratings throughout pretty much their entire existence, that has been used as their guiding, governing principle of anything and everything that they've ever done, that with the declining ratings per quarter-hour segment and the terrible ratings that Eric Young has drawn as a TNA World Champion, you would think that if anything, going into this pay-per-view, they would be fully bound and determined to take the fucking title off of him. But I guess not. TNA surprised me here. I actually thought that either Lashley was going to win or that Austin Aries would turn heel, align himself with MVP's faction, and win the belt, and he didn't do that. Instead, you had Eric Young and pertaining the title. Now, a lot of you are going to talk about how this was really good. And maybe to a degree it was, especially with Austin Aries and Eric Young. They had really good chemistry together. It actually might work as a world title feud. But it would work to me so much better if Austin Aries is the heel champion and Eric Young is the babyface that is trying to pursue him. I had absolutely no interest in Eric Young walking in the champion and then ending the night as champion, and by God, that's exactly what the fuck I got. I talked about on my Slammiversary preview show that TNA, to me, for my purposes at least, and for their purposes in general, I thought really needed to knock it out of the park. And it seems like a lot of the people on the interwebs actually thought that this was a really, really good show. So from that standpoint, and looking at the fact that they drew a bigger crowd than I was expecting them to draw, this show has to be at least considered somewhat of a success for TNA. And I have to say that this show ended up being quite a bit better than I anticipated. It actually was, especially from TNA's perspective, this to me was actually a passable pay-per-view and had some good moments and a couple of really good moments. But the ultimate thing was, to me, was that this show really needed to produce and really needed to deliver. And I just don't think it did for me and me alone. You still have a Knockouts division that I couldn't give a shit about. You still have a Samoa Joe being treated like crap. You still have, stupid-ass booking like Anderson aligning himself with the Dallas Cowboys. With the whole Texas death match, the Hall of Fame announcement of Team 3D, Eric Young walking out the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. I'm sorry, but no. TNA ultimately didn't do enough to get me back into watching Impact every single week. Now, was this show so bad to where I'm going to skip it for 4 months and then come back at Bound for Glory? No. Will I probably give them another chance, let's say, with their Destination X show? Yes, I think that's probably the next show. So it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Like I said, I actually thought this was a good, passable pay-per-view. But hear me out. As bad as TNA's television in particular had become, they needed to do more than good and passable for me to really get back interested in the product. And in particular, I look at this and I say, from a television standpoint, there's not a lot that appeals to me to get me to want to watch Impact on Thursday. So ultimately, TNA didn't accomplish the mission I felt they needed to in order to get me to keep watching their product. Like I said, I'll probably give them another chance at Destination X, but for the time being, no watching Impact, no more Impact reviews for me for the time being.